I feel God's grace every day as I navigate these sometimes muddy waters of parenting. Um, I know that I make mistakes, and I know that I don't always do the right thing, but we don't have training in this job, so it is a game time decision oftentimes, and we do the best we can. Sometimes the best I can is probably not good enough. And no matter how hard the day is, or no matter how much trials and tribulations we went through, we lay down and do our prayers every night. And the next morning, I wake up anew and refreshed. And I know that that is God's grace. I wake up and I'm ready to tackle the day again with a positive attitude and a new outlook. And even if the day, not long after I wake up, is again muddy, I still will do that same thing again the next day. And I know that's only by God's grace. So I thank Him for that and am so appreciative that I have that outlook and that grace. God bless.
Okay, the subject is grace, and I know a lot about that just because I've needed it so much. I think as women, we all are insecure and self-image, all of that we work through. And I was feeling really down one day, and I remembered that song, Grace that is greater than all our sin. And I thought, is that just a song or is that in the Bible? So I looked it up, and in Romans 5:20 it says, where sin increased, grace increased all the more. And then in Romans 6:14 it says, God placed us under His grace. Sin has no more dominion over us. So ladies, sin has no more dominion over us. And if we just dwell on it, it's going to keep in us. But no, I choose to dwell on God's grace for me. That will make me worthy by the blood of Jesus. But grace, His grace is greater than all our sin. And that is worth everything to me. I love His grace for me.
This grace of God is a very great, strong, mighty, and active thing. It does not lie asleep in the soul. Grace hears, leads, drives, draws, changes works, all in all, and lets itself be distinctly felt and experienced. It is hidden, but its works are evident. Martin Luther. My experience and feeling of God's grace. Special people are placed in my path to help me during the challenges that appear in my life. It's like they drop out of the sky right on cue. I see friends shaking hands, and they're really saying, I love you. Thank you, Creator, for your grace. What a wonderful world. Forever grateful.
We've all heard at one time or another in our lives, people say, there but for the grace of God go I. And often that could be referring to sickness or homelessness or the tragic loss of a loved one. Something that would come between yourself and a happy life. There but for the grace of God go I. Meaning that could be me, but it's not. It's not me. So we should be grateful for the grace that the Lord has given us. Now I think it's something different. Now I think that grace is what I see in my life that it isn't. For instance, I've been very depressed all my life. It's a chronic depression. It's documented. I'm medicated for it. And that's led me many times to very, very despairing times in my life where I just would think, what's the point? It's too hard, this living thing. It's too hard. But in thinking about today and reflecting on Martin Luther's words on what grace is, I don't think that God has given me grace to keep me from jumping off the roof, or kept me from overdosing myself, or just wishing that I could fall asleep and never wake up again. I think that the grace I've received is the compassion that I feel for other people who are hurting. I feel for people that are hungry, and for those who are, well, less fortunate because they have to keep on living in the worst situations. I mean, they really have felt tragedy. They've seen their children pass. They've seen bodies mutilated in the streets. They've seen themselves riddled with cancer. They face death that they didn't wish upon themselves. They didn't daydream, oh, maybe I'll just die so that I don't have to be so darn depressed. I think that grace is why I'm here. Grace is for me to give love to others in whatever way I can, and that's how I live my life. I survive by loving other people, and I think that that's my grace. I think that God gave me this wonderful ability to love others. It's that simple. Thanks.
The grace of God. There's so much that we can look around in our lives and realize how God has been beside us and surrounding us through it all. But if I need to pinpoint a specific moment or area where God has been present, I need to say my family. That's my family. We were raised by my mother and my grandmother, and we were 4 siblings. Since little, we heard about God and about faith and about giving to others through these 2 amazing women of faith. And to this day, even through the different hassles and issues and problems that each one of us may face independently, we know that we can count on the other. There's multiple messages and texts in the morning, checking on each other, and each one of us know that the other ones are praying for us when we're going through difficult times. So I am blessed incredibly because God sent me to this family. and put me in this world surrounded by this much love. And like anyone else, I have faced my share of trials, and each one of them independently. And as a family, we have faced many situations that definitely were not in our plans. But God has been there through it all. And God has given an incredible proof of His grace in my life by giving them to me, by giving me the blessing of being part of this family. And there's not much to say. God really thought of the blessing, of the support that I needed way before I was even born, and sent me to this amazing family that truly shows to me what is the grace of God. How each one of us have each other, support each other, and even when we do not agree with each other's decisions, we're there to love each other. Thank you.
When I was at Synod Assembly years ago now, a woman had us free write during a workshop for just a few minutes to write about what our experience of God was like recently. And I wrote out that I felt like God is always inviting me to lunch, and I always make plans, but then I have to cancel, I have to rearrange, and I feel very bad. And in the workshop, I felt like bursting into tears because I thought, oh, this is so terrible. At some point, God will stop inviting me to lunch. But that is the difference between our relationship with God and our relationship with other humans. Because yes, if you had to reschedule with me after a couple of times, I would assume you were trying to tell me that you didn't really like me or want to be my friend. And happily, God does not ever say, well, I guess that Kristen just does not really want to be my friend, and so I'm going to send a plague of frogs on her head. Happily, God does not work that way. That's my understanding of grace, simplistic as it seems, that God will keep inviting us to lunch, even if we say no. God will keep inviting us to far better things than lunch. Even if we say no, God will show up again and again to invite us to lunch and greater things. And that's what God's grace has meant to me through the years.
A moment of God's grace. I was in 10th grade, a reluctant youth representative to the Florida Synod Youth Assembly, a convocation gathering that met alongside the adults at Synod Assembly. We worshiped together, explored Bible studies, and dealt with tough topics that were on the agenda that year. Many of them were unfamiliar to me. However, there was one subject that was a favorite of mine: a Lutheran camp. You see, I was new to Florida at the time and was deeply disappointed to find out that our synod had no Lutheran camp on its territory. On the agenda was a proposal that year to enter into a unique relationship with another Lutheran community and to operate a camp together. They had acquired land, and we had a program and staff, one that we had generally taken to Luther Ridge in North Carolina. But our churches had a big history to overcome, and trust was very thin. So the proposal that year lacked broad support and would likely fail if it was brought to a vote. I was a member of the youth contingent that gathered together with others, both proponents and antagonists of this proposal. and we met for many hours with each side. Finally, in the wee hours of the morning, we had come up with a totally new proposal, and we had a slot the next day in the Synod agenda to present it. But the question was who would stand up and share our proposal. My teammates turned to me and said, "You should present it." And then they went off to bed. I was left flabbergasted. Me? Speak in front of all those adults? I was worried about the naysayers in the crowd, those who had many questions about such a proposal, and I wasn't sure I could answer them. I was also worried about the commitment, the financial commitment, and also the commitment of the other Lutherans. Could we trust them? I was anxious on my own behalf because I wondered if I could speak persuasively. As I prepared for bed that night, I did what I had been doing for many years. I just opened my Bible and began to read until something spoke to me. On this particular night, my Bible opened to the first chapter of Jeremiah and his call to ministry. The word of the Lord came to me saying, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. I set you apart and appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Jeremiah said, "Alas, sovereign Lord, I do not know how to speak. I am too young." But the Lord said, "Do not say, 'I am too young.' You must go to everyone I send you and say whatever I command you to say. Don't be afraid of them, for I am with you, and I will provide for you," declared the Lord. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, "I have put my words in your mouth. See, today I appoint you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to tear down, to destroy and overthrow, but also to build and to plant." Those were the words spoken to Jeremiah. But those same words I felt as if were being spoken to me. So I went to sleep that night and awoke refreshed, happy to be of service, and assured that God was with me. Although initially nervous when I took the podium, I soon found my voice and I spoke passionately about our proposal and the need for a camp for young people as a way to experience the gospel in different ways than normally in church, to make lasting friendships as I had over the years, and finally to hear God's call. The proposal elicited a lot of discussion, but in the end it passed with flying colors. It was my first experience stepping out to speak up, heeding God's call not to be afraid, but to speak what the Lord had given me to say to God's people gathered in meetings, in worship, and later in Bible study too. And to this day, the words that were spoken to Jeremiah have assured and reassured me through many difficult times. And I have been blessed to share those same words with other young people over the years. Do not say you're only a youth, for God's grace can do far more in us and through us than we can possibly imagine.
This grace of God is a very great, strong, mighty, and active thing. It does not lie asleep in the soul. Grace hears, leads, drives, draws, changes, works all in all, and lets itself be distinctly felt and experienced. It is hidden, but its works are evident. That was said by Martin Luther. I've been asked today to talk about how I felt and experienced God's grace. And the reality is, I feel God's grace on a daily basis. I feel it in my home, in every breath, in the support of my family and friends, in the opportunities that I've been granted, in the doors that have been opened, and in the beauty of nature around me. As many of you know, I've been given an opportunity to move to Scranton for a short while for a job. And every single step of that process, I felt God's hand and God's grace as a part of it. And so my challenge to you is not necessarily to look for God's grace in the huge things and the ways that God gives us the things that we aren't deserving of, but more so to think of God's grace in the simple things, the mundane things, the everyday things, the beauty of a flower or a tree, the laughter as we sit around with those we love, the joy that we feel in just living and breathing and doing the things that we love, the grace that God gives us to wake us up every morning and allow us to fall asleep each night, and the grace to know that no matter where we are or what is going on, we are in God's hands and taken care of. Thank you.
This grace of God is a very great, strong, mighty, and active thing. It does not lie asleep in the soul. Grace hears, leads, drives, draws, changes, works all in all, and lets itself be distinctly felt and experienced. It is hidden, but its works are evident. Martin Luther.